Today's startup offers an inclusive and unbiased stage for startup founders to shine and share their entrepreneurship and startup journeys to inspire international audiences on tech news around the world. Today's startup features Catarina Lemos Cunha, founder CEO, SolveTheMind. Welcome, Catarina.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction and for everyone being here. It's such an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you give us an introduction of your background in brief, and also what inspires or motivate you to become an entrepreneur, and what have you been doing recently regarding this startup that you're working on?
Yeah, sure.
The floor.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm originally from Portugal, but I grew up in Germany. I did my master's in neuroscience and biology, and then I went ahead and did the PhD. I was part of an international PhD program from Paid by Europe. They select 12 people a year, and then we get sent all over the world to meet with like the best scientists of their field, of different fields of science, and then we could basically choose wherever we wanted to go and whatever scientific fields we wanted to go. And so I then went ahead and did a collaboration between Duke University and New York University. At Duke, I did more technology development, such as NPHR. It's like inhibitory optogenetic tools in neuroscience, and genetic inhibitor indicator, so you can basically visualize inhibition in the brain and then use light to inhibit cells in the brain, which like scales up the efficiency of investigation. And at New York University, I was more focused on mental health disorders, and in this case, anxiety disorders. So it was a really great combination. Since I had my own money and my own research money, I had the luxury of not just working on whatever the lab wanted to do, but also develop my own ideas. And this was basically the seed for me to have the luxury to become a very independent thinker, and to merge different areas of science to solve problems, not just use one tool and then focus on problems that you can use with that tool, but see it from a broader perspective. So I'm very thankful for that PhD program. And the basic thing to know about all the projects I do is they are based on annoyance, to be honest. Like whenever I'm annoyed about the current state of something and I have enough knowledge and skills to solve them, if I'm annoyed enough, I'll try. So that's basically where all the projects are born. Oh yeah, I hear I'm not loud enough. Is it better now?
Just okay.
Okay. So the company SolveTheMind is basically, I developed these ideas and I started doing research on these ideas parallel, to the regular job I had for years now. And one thing that sparked, for example, the natural language analyzer for mental health disorders was because, I read a lot of Daniel Kahneman's work and Amos Tversky and how biased diagnosis is. And since mental health was basically the research field I was in, I wanted to try to develop something that everyone can afford, and to have a less biased screening tool for mental health. And and I realized that using too many screening methods adds up a lot of noise, and I found that everyday language, how people just regular speak, was a quite reliable one. So yeah, that was how the first idea developed. And then the others, with SolveTheMind, we also have a few one novel drug targets, and then a few novel usage of existing drugs. And how I came up with that idea is that in adults, usually cells don't change their shape anymore unless it's in cancer. Immune cells, but also and during synaptic plasticity. And back then, when I started researching this was very controversial, so I had to use like my own money to research it because I didn't get any funding for it. So what I did, I screened cancer drugs because the field of cancer research always had more money, and it's decades of advance from neuroscience and mental health treatment. So I screened for cancer drugs that would fit the target also of plasticity that should be different in people with different mental health disorders. So that was basically how I started developing these new drug treatments, and I have currently 3 patents that are being evaluated for novel mental health treatments. And the stories behind, I have also other projects going on. One is, science books for girls. This also started based on annoyance because I realized that my small daughter, compared to my 2 boys that are older, she came always home with books that didn't have a lot of knowledge transfer. It was more like about princesses and unicorns. So I started with my daughter these projects to bring interest to girls for everyday science. So that's the most, and probably realized that already from whenever I talk at tech news around the world. What motivates me is when I see something is wrong. Yeah, and stories along the journey. I had a lot of negative stories actually, and I don't even know how I'm still here to do all of this. I was a postdoc on a visa here in the US. Obviously, I didn't have that much money, just a little bit of money to put money into my research. And I had a bunch of people in different phases taking advantage of how naive I was in the beginning to talk about this research, just because I was still pretty much an academic researcher that just puts out the knowledge there. And actually, that's how my moral is: to make progress, you have to put the knowledge out there as soon as you have it, so people can build up on it. But I had many times the problem that people took, this ideas from me and claimed different things to basically, so they can basically monetize my projects and my ideas. So I had this problem a few times. Actually, the most recent one was the worst, where a whole foundation, actually led by this research director, tried to actually also put my whole integrity as a person and so on. They made like a campaign against me, that I do child abuse, like what you read about this pizza, abducting children. They took a very similar approach against me, just because I didn't want to sign away my IP for the foundation. And I said that I don't agree on it because I wasn't agreeing on what they wanted to use all these ideas for. When I said no, basically, I had, all this campaigns against me, against my person, what I do, that I abuse children. However, I never did clinical trials with any children, and so on. So, but this time, I had already my green card, and I had already some money from my regular consulting company. So I had basically the money to, to take lawyers and fight back. So this was really important. So the advice I can give out there is don't wait when something like this happens. I heard it's actually relatively common. Don't wait, fight back right away when somebody wants to steal your ideas and makes this slander campaigns against you. It doesn't really help waiting. Yeah, and don't be too trustworthy. Check out the people very thoroughly before you share your ideas with them, and also don't waste time on people that promise a lot of things and don't deliver. That's another problem in the beginning that I wasn't really good at, is vetting people and seeing and just cut my losses right away with people that would just promise a lot but never delivered. But I think that's all very common. I was just not educated enough for this journey in the beginning, but I learned a lot. But I think you can avoid a lot of this, and probably everyone in this room would have done it better than me to avoid all these issues. Yeah, I talked for a while. I can go into more depth, but I can also just stop.
Yeah. So you mentioned just now, I guess it's also because you came from Germany, right? So coming to US culture, is that also one kind of culture shock that you have to experience
Yes, very
in
much.
terms of managing expectation?
Yeah, because everyone is so nice here in the US. When you in Europe talk about an idea, people will most of the time tell you it's crap and it will never lead to anything. And here in the US, it's quite the opposite. But and if in Europe somebody tells you, "Oh, this is good, you should do it," then you really can rely on that you should really do it. Or also, when people promise you to do something in Germany, they most of the time, maybe it changed the last years, I'm not sure, but most of the time they'll do it because the threshold for somebody to offering their help or to offer their support is way higher than here. So I agree that it was probably a cultural difference, that just speaking the language doesn't really mean that you really understand the culture and how people.
Mental health space is not an easy, problem to tackle. So, what is the biggest challenge you have overcome so far when you're working on this area?
Yeah, it's mostly funding if you have a really new idea and new approach. I think recently it's changing. I think actually around this year with the pandemic, it's changing, that more money and more interest has started. But previously, to get there was almost a resignation in companies to find a new mental health treatment approach. Even my professor Joseph Ledoux from NYU, he wrote a whole article that he thinks he basically wrote off all the work he did his whole life, because he said, "Oh, we researched all of this in animals, and animals are not as conscious as we are, so everything we did, he didn't think it will help." And companies were drawing away money from mental health research to other areas because it just wasn't profitable, and every new drug that was discovered didn't really add on to or it didn't help. So there was almost, when I started this, there was almost a resignation in the field to actually find a cure and to actually help people and not just suppress the symptoms. But I think it's changing now a little bit, also with the new rediscovery of of like magic mushrooms and LSD and so on. So I think this brought up a new hope for the field. So
Great. So, Catarina, do you want to tell more stories, or you want to open the floor to the audience Q&A? Because usually there are very interesting questions, and they'll bring you to different directions.
yeah, let's open up for questions and then.
Okay, great. But before that, can you just let us know what is the stage of your startup now? Are you pre-revenue, post-revenue, or pre-product, or?
So
Because I know drugs need to go through FDA, right?
yeah, exactly. So for the drugs, we finished the preclinical trials, and we have submitted patents for them. So the next stage is to go to clinical trials. And for the mental health screening tool, we are doing business to business. We are only right now using it for business to business usage, EHR, and so on. The next stage for that, I would like to open it up for more languages and more countries, especially in countries. That was the whole idea for this product, to bring it basically to people where they have the least access to mental health treatment and specialists. But it's really, really hard. And so that you can monitor yourself if you start taking a drug, or if you maybe want to start using a drug, or if you want to start a treatment. Also, where still stigma is quite high, so people can screen themselves like in an anonymous way. So yeah, I started it in English because it was the easiest way to get data for me here in the US, but we started to develop the tool for depression, at least in Spanish, and for the addiction, the impulsivity version. And now the next step is to go into more languages and hopefully make collaborations.
Thank you, Katerina. Okay, so we'll open the floor for questions. So those in the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I'll bring you up, or you can back channel me. So for those on stage, please flash your mic if you want to ask a question. Okay, Lawrence, go ahead.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, Katerina, I just want to say that I had a thorough look at your website, and I'm really, really impressed with what you've done thus far. I think Solve the Mind has amazing potential. I've done some work on natural language processing in the past, and I do want to ask about some concerns that I have, especially in the field of mental health screening, which seems to be developing at a fast pace. Um, how have you been able to develop your natural language processing tool to handle contextual words? Because I know that words and phrases have different meanings, especially when you talk about context. And I know that it's easy for us humans to understand, because we read the context of a sentence, all right, and we understand all of the different definitions. But natural language processing models may have learned all of the definitions and differentiate between them, but not fully understand it. Your language tool is such that you want people to type in how they're feeling, you know, like a 300 word, for instance, on your website, which I saw. They'll type in how they're feeling, how their day is going, and it's meant to now extract information. But how does it do the contextual work? How does it really differentiate between certain contextual meanings? I think that's where my gray spot is for your screening tool.
So it was very important to me that the tool doesn't spy on people and analyzes what people are talking about. So that was very important to me, and we don't, unless it's for a specific study where we would ask people to keep their data. But from people, if they test the tool, and I have a downsized version of it to try out on the website. We don't keep any data from anyone. because also it's not clean data, right? To make the tool really good, I need pre-screened people and then control groups and so on. So also it doesn't really make a lot of sense to keep everyone's data. But as I said, I really didn't want the tool to screen what people are talking about. So we basically analyzed the metadata of language. We look for different word categories, mostly small word categories, and the pattern in which people use these small word classes. By that, we could figure out the mental states quite reliably. So we don't really actually care much about the context and what people are talking.
So, well, that's a good response. So I'm assuming that your metadata set is quite extensive, and you already have words and phrases that are associated with, I would say, people who are having certain mental health challenges, and as such, you're able to make a deduction. So if I understand what you just said, there is no ambiguity whatsoever. You don't really care about the context. I think you're just looking out for certain patterns. Is that a good interpretation of what you just said?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Which is so.
thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Lawrence. Okay, who else wants to ask a question? Please flash your mic. Okay, Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, just a short. Um, you say that you use a pattern that's surprising, and no tonality and kind of what is typical in the domain. I think to analyze for the emotional tone, of course, like for having kind of language markers for depression. And so, how did you train this thing? That is my question, because somehow you must have made this discovery that the pattern, the grammatical pattern, or the particles are somehow enough to diagnose. So, how what was your data volume to study this? Maybe I've not got it and you've told it, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, we had a lot of data from different sources. When I started this, it was at Stony Brook University, so we collaborated with the clinic there and with psychiatrists that gave me access to a lot of data sets. There was actually a really good study that was perfect actually for the depression tool. That was the first study that had real controls and real brain imaging data from people that were depressed or not depressed but naive. They never took any drugs. And then they started them on different drug treatments and then did brain imaging throughout the study time for many months and compared. So I was lucky to have access to that data. Another source was the institute that is led by Stony Brook University from 9/11 first responders and survivors, where I had a lot of data for the resilience tool, but I also used other publicly available data from NIH and so on. So we analyzed a lot of different. The first idea that there were papers from the 90s that were really, really interesting, where people actually, where scientist named Pennebaker, he actually showed, he was the first one to have like the first hint to show that you actually don't need to do the sentiment analysis, and that's actually not the most reliable one to study depression. He focused on depression. So that's, reading these papers really helped me to basically start with this approach. Yeah, I did before just basic sentiment analysis, but that's, sentiment that's quite, your sentiment over the day changes, right? It's not really reliable, unless you're really severely depressed. But even then, you sometimes have people talk actually quite positively and use actually extreme positive words, although they are very depressed. So we found that it's actually not very reliable. Grammar is an issue depending on, because it's just, if you just analyze grammar itself, it's actually, we found that it analyzes more for educational background than anything else. And I did some work also in Alzheimer's studies before in Portugal to analyze these different methods. So yeah, it was a mixture of papers I read and different studies I had access to that basically, gave me the idea to do it this way, but then also really good and clean.
Thank you. Willie, I hope that answered your question. Anyone
Yes.
else want to ask a question? Thank you, Willie. Please flash your mic. Hi, Sanjeev.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for having me up here, Heyman. Katrina, really cool problem you're addressing. Really admire it. I'm sorry if what I ask may have already been stated because I had kind of tuned out a bit in the middle of big due to a phone call. But okay, I have two questions. One is, who do you consider your core end users? And I'm asking this purely from a point of product market fit and how you're going about commercializing this. So if you may answer that, and then I have another follow-up question.
So there's a lot of use requests, right? And I select them quite thoroughly. So of course, where I really wanted to go in was that ideally primary care doctors that are not, or around the world, places where people go to get screens or follow-ups, maybe even just the nurse. In Portugal, it's quite common that for a lot of things you just see the nurse and so on, where people are not trained to recognize mental health disorders, would still have a tool that would screen just based on the conversation nurses or so on have with their patients. That tool could screen based on 300 words of the conversation and say, maybe you should suggest this person to search for, seek treatment. So that was my main goal and is my main goal. There are a few companies also that approach me that I want to support basically their workers to screen like for mental health, especially with remote work where people are quite isolated. That is another another market there, and yeah, my goal right now is to not just stay in the US, but to go to other places in the world where it's actually more needed, even more needed than here in the US. Yeah, so that's everyone basically that needs a screening ideally would have, and where the person that is doing some sort of screening or patient care, but that isn't a specialist for mental health disorders, that would have that support to recognize, because mental health disorders are rising at a quite concerning level. So the earlier we can detect those issues, we can intervene and prevent them from becoming a chronic issue. And mental health doesn't just stay in mental health, right? We know that people with mental health disorders then also usually have unhealthy everyday habits, which then leads to other chronic diseases, more likely to have diabetes and even cancer and so on and so forth. So yeah, the ideal is to screen early and broad, a very broad population, and hopefully people then seek treatment when they are.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
sorry, I'm just trying to understand what. So basically, it means that your focus right now is to get the product to more primary care doctors who are the first, who become the conduit to reach end users who really need this, right? From what I understand from your long-term plan of reaching out, it's pretty broad even now, and you would need to kind of get into a niche user segment to really drive adoption is what I would think. I have a follow-up question when it comes to the primary care doctors itself. Cheryl, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So when it comes to mental health, and you've listed that on your site also, that it's a long-term process, right? People go through various phases. You start with detection, and then you are going through the journey of getting treatment, consulting, and stuff like that. So how does the product enable tracking? For example, if I visit a doctor for the first time, and let's say I'm kind of getting on with depression, I have a conversation through a preset or predefined survey, let's say, that the doctor drives me through the product. I have no clue about how the product works truly, so I'm just assuming things here. So, okay, I have the first session, the doctor prescribes certain activities I should do. I do that, and then I have a follow-up session, let's say 6 weeks later. Then at that time, the history of my previous markers that have been derived from the product, is that retained and is that referenced? And how does that follow up with the next set of questions that the doctor or the product kind of enables the whole engagement process? So is that the way you are doing this? Or does it handle data that way?
So what we do, like we started collaborating with EHR companies, so that's how we get into the market. And the doctors then, if they see it as something necessary, can give our tool on the phone to their patients. And because when you, let's say you start changing your habits, or you start even on a drug, it's crucial to keep monitoring how well you're doing on the drug, because usually how this works, we don't really know exactly which drug fits which patient the best, right? We have like a bunch of drugs that we could prescribe the patient, but it's not really well established key factors that allow us to establish which drug will fit the patient the best. So ideally, you will have some every day, or at least weekly or every few days screening. And our tool can offer that because it's very cheap and it's very scalable. So patients can use our API through the the MyChart or whatever that clinic is using to screen their mental health state every day in a very cheap way, so that it doesn't drive the cost crazy, but you have like an ongoing test and monitoring without having to pay every week a psychiatrist. So it's mostly to use when you need to cut costs, and in situations where you can't really have all the time a psychiatrist. It's not supposed to replace a psychiatrist by any means. It's just to offer an additional ongoing screening tool that is scalable, but it's so cheap, so you can actually use it.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you. Okay, who else would like to ask the next question? Okay,
Hi,
Lawrence, you can go. Hi, Pat, go
No,
ahead.
sorry. I just wanted to expand a little bit. Thank you, Cheryl, on the question that I believe Lawrence might have started asking. Anyway, it really is about the tool, Katrina, and how you developed the actual parameters for how it works. So it's from the language and probably the tone of the person, if it's a voice recording, that then triggers off in the tool the context within which those words are used, the tone is affecting itself, and therefore then that links up to a diagnosis at some level that will help the primary care member of staff. But how is the data set handled and created using, and this is the question, was it with using a lot of that brain imaging material that you got from that that research project and program that you talked about? And is it about linking the um, electrical functions within the brain that then helps you associate certain words to certain conditions? Because if for instance, if people just use a language, it might be just, as you were saying, an education level where certain words are put together incorrectly or something, and so then that couldn't be an accurate way to define their language skills. So how does it?
So we don't use brain imaging for our screening. It was just in order to get really clean data that we are quite sure that this patient has really depression and how severe depression is, or if it's getting better. In the beginning, it was really helpful to have this additional data to just confirm if we have clean data sets, basically. But later on, we don't use brain imaging for this, and also we don't need tone for our analysis. It's also very different from culture to culture based on what your native language is. It adds up way too much noise to the data sets, I would say. That's at least what we saw. Maybe other people. I know there are people that just look at tone, but we realized that a lot of different data sets we in the beginning thought would be for sure really great to take into account just added more noise than actual real information. More noise meaning that other factors were more important than the mental health state to the differences in the tone or in grammar. You have to be really careful to actually have really a lot of different control groups and then see if the significance you see is actually due to the mental state or if other factors have a bigger weight on the differences. And we saw that.
I'm
So
being really cheeky here. Sorry, Lawrence, you go ahead first. I might have a second.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Yeah, Katerina, it seems we're going to need to have a separate room conversation because I've been doing a lot of work in natural language processing. So this is something I'm really, really interested in. And I think you're on the verge of something fascinating, but there seems to be certain gaps in your understanding of the industry, which me, Pat, and Sanjeev are trying to plug. Um, Especially when it comes to mental health screening in the industry now, there are lots of virtual therapists that are able to treat and detect depression and post traumatic stress disorder. And I think what's special about that sort of technology is that it not only can detect words, but like other people in this chat room have mentioned, it can detect nonverbal cues, which is super important. You know, and I'm not getting the sense that you care about that. I mean, you explicitly told me that you don't necessarily care about that, and I'm not sure why, because it doesn't show to me a good understanding of the industry you're in. You're trying to give yourself a competitive advantage, So why aren't you interested in that? You know, being that you started this a couple months ago or about a year ago, you have a really good opportunity to position yourself alongside the competitors in your industry, or perhaps even give yourself a competitive advantage with some of those nonverbal cues and even the positioning of the structure. And I don't get the sense that you're interested in that. And I'm trying to figure out why. Even someone else said that that's actually good. And I think it was Mar, I think that's how his name is pronounced. And he said that that's good. And I don't understand why. I mean, for something, for someone as intelligent as you are and as knowledgeable in the field of neuroscience, I would imagine that you know your company is too early to have done the parametric analysis that you've done, which you claim has determined a lot of factors based on influence. I feel you're
And
a bit too early.
sorry, this is
So
Heyman. Just a
just to
reminder.
add that,
Just a reminder. This is going to be publicly broadcast, so anything that you say would be in the public domain. So
Sure.
I'm conscious of IP and anything that's been done. So I just want to make sure that people understand that too. Thank you.
well, I started this work years ago. The company, I had to have a green card and everything in place for me to be allowed to start a company here in the US. But the work itself, I started years ago, 2018. It's when I actually started doing this work. And my idea is not to make the most fanciest, that looks like the most fanciest for investors tool. What I want is the easiest to use and the most scalable and cheapest tool out there. So actually people around the world, not just in the US, my interest is to help people around the world where they don't have access to any care sometimes, that they will be able to use this in an anonymous way and without stigma, and then seek hopefully help, or maybe by you know recognizing just the problems, maybe people change their habits and so on. So this is only one part of my company, right? This is the screening one. My heart and passion is not just, of course, in the screening and bring this to as many people around the world in the cheapest way. What I want to do is always something that everyone can afford and use. I am not interested in any project that it's just for a few rich people that have fancy phones. That's not what I want to achieve. Um, and um, and also, of course, to stay very accurate, um, and that the quality is still good and very accurate. And I don't see those tools that use other factors, just like tone and so on, to that they could increase the accuracy. I didn't see that. I don't see tools that are more accurate than the tools that I developed over the years. So
If I can quickly comment on this, at least for bipolar and hypomania and mania, there would likely be a really strong signal related to pressured speech in terms of cadence and um, uh, projection and other features. It's really recognizable, and to the extent that you don't have really strong signals associated with that, I think that would be worth looking at.
I think
yes,
that's
it's true. I'm not saying that those other tools are not um, finding differences. I just also found that the word categories and libraries we use and at the patterns we are looking at, they are also just as accurate to, let's say, especially in bipolar, we tested this to recognize when a crisis onset is happening. Um, but I'm not saying that there are not other ways. I actually do, in my regular research, I did analysis of different sound spectra and looking at patterns and so on, and different animals under different threat conditions and so on. It's not like that I know you can analyze that in a way. It's just, let's say you don't have, a fancy phone available, but you text a lot. To copy in text that you use throughout the day, it's very easy and very cheap and very fast to analyze, and very cheap for me also, instead of looking at tone spectra and so on and so forth. It's just, I look at the most efficient way, but there are companies out there doing it that way, and that is, of course, also very valuable data. I'm not saying.
Catarina, what you said reminded me of Chris Zhang, who did fluidics, right? Fluid IQ. He also focused on simplicity and accessibility. The objective is not to make money. The objective is to spread the good product to across the world. Good job, Catarina. Continue on the journey of what you believe in.
Absolutely.
Very inspiring.
Absolutely. Katrina, I have one question with regard to, I was just looking at the demo that you have on the website. And I'm curious, you mentioned you want to go outside of the US to other parts of the world where people really need this. So my question is about language. You have Spanish right now in the demo. What are the languages you have planned to, add to this tool, and what do you see is a challenge in that? Do you see any challenges at all when it comes to adopting new languages? For example, if one has to do, a language out of India or African language and stuff like that. How difficult is it to do it or scale to?
Starting from scratch,
Yep.
because in different cultures, language is used very differently, and word structures are very different. So you have to basically start from scratch, and we are talking with different people to start in India to collaborate. However, why I take longer to start a collaboration is I want to make sure that the tool is used in the right way. And this is another conflict I had throughout time, is that people wanted to use the tool in a way I don't want it to be used. So that made me make way less money and collaborate with way less people. But it's just, I'm very careful about what the prospects are. One thing with the Indian market is, of course, it's a problem to send data over here, so I have to be even more careful with whom I want to collaborate and give my make my IP available to, because I can't there's it's a big problem to send me data here, and for me to do it from here with native speakers, it would have to be in India, ideally, with people there. So I have to screen really well, because I don't want the tool to be misused. I also had a really good integrity tool developed, just because I think it was very interested. I just think it's very interesting, and just did it for a hobby for a while. And also psychopath, different types of psychopath. But I stopped. I hid those tools. I don't make them available anymore, because it's quite questionable what you can do with them. So it wasn't really in the scope of what I wanted to do. So the next market is, of course, the European market. My brother, he's a neurosurgeon there, so we always talked about this. So we want to start doing this. One reason is, for example, before he does a major brain surgery, he has like 15 minutes to screen people to assess if they have other mental health disorders such as depression, because if you do, it's known that the risk for chronic pain and other complications is way higher. But he's not a specialist, and he always said this tool would make his life way easier. So we will continue this probably. I know it's not the biggest market, but it's a good way to try it out because I can get data fairly easily in German and in French and so on. So for the European market, and then based on that experience, I think I will go then into other countries, but probably India will be also.
Thank you, Catarina. Who would like to ask the next question? Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Katerina. I love hearing about this type of company. So I think the product is awesome. I was wondering when you're doing the English and the Spanish languages, if you found any kind of overlap or similarities, or if you had to, like you said, build from scratch to run two different systems. So thanks again for.
So yeah, for Spanish it was not completely from scratch because I think there is some overlap, but there are cultural differences, and for specific word categories that were quite important. It was quite different. So it was not completely starting from scratch, but it was, almost. So it's, yeah, but I really enjoyed the work and I find it really interesting, and you learn a lot by doing it. But yeah, also another bigger part, I think, of the company is the new drug research that I'm really excited about because it's not just screening, it's also develop new drugs that maybe help better in different disorders. And one drug target is for the anxiety disorders. I found a new specific receptor that is not overly abundantly available throughout the brain, but I found it in one of the main anxiety centers, the amygdala. And the good thing about this receptor is it doesn't desensitize, so you don't have to keep upscaling the drug dosage like you usually have to, and the dependency issue is basically not present if you target this receptor. So I'm really excited about that. And then the others are the epigenetic drugs, where you basically go more into the root cause of different plasticity and different disorders. Yeah, and I'm also really excited about.
If the information is public, what's the name of?
Caterina, do you hear Ellie's question? The name of the receptor.
Yeah, it's a GABA C receptor. It's not very well known, but yeah, it's GABA C. If you want to look at it, so most current drugs, they target GABA A or GABA B receptors, and especially GABA A receptors. They desensitize, and they're quite big receptors, so they're really bad target for chronic anxiolytics. And so, yeah, I discovered the GABA C receptor in the amygdala. I'm excited to continue working on that to find a better.
So is it agonists or antagonists that are anxiolytic? If that's public.
Well, in humans, we have to figure that out because it can sometimes be different from what is known in rats. But it's assumably will be similar, but yeah, we have to figure that out first. So the problem is more which is not really a problem nowadays because mushroom, the compound that targets this drug usually comes from mushrooms that are, under controlled substances, but hopefully with the change in perception in the public and also hopefully in the law, those drugs will be available for.
Thank you. Hey man, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, no, thanks, Katarina, for joining us. One question I had, I mean, I see the huge potential for all of this, given my specialty, but I'm wondering, like, if we could pull back a bit, like we are sitting on a elephant that we've not talked about, like basically a huge data set that we're sitting on, like social audio platforms. How could you apply this to sort of be a sort of a biometric for people who are participating in this space? Like, how could you gauge? Can you actually leverage these kind of technologies to help people gauge how they're feeling, or how to allow others to help gauge how someone else is feeling?
So do you mean to offer, for example, Clubhouse to use the API and then you get the score basically by the end of the day,
Yeah. So
what your
basically,
likelihood for?
yeah, we were conversing a lot, right, in different scenarios. So I'm just wondering, is depending on the rooms or depending on how you interact, there's a lot of data that's being collected, right? Audio, natural languages. And so I'm curious to know is if that'll have a much bigger impact for people on a daily basis, and also for their clinicians and so forth. But I know there's the other side to it too, right? The marketing and aspect that's natural. It's naturally going to happen anyways. So why not leverage it for health as well? Like just like time on most phones actually tell you how much time you're using the apps, right? So what if you could actually gauge how you're performing in terms of your language?
Yeah, that's a good idea, and we were thinking about it. Also, what the next step is that I want to develop, other than going into different languages, is for the end customer. So not just business to business, but for the customer, I wanted to actually develop then a tool that will train you basically. My idea was to use basically this biofeedback on neurofeedback idea, and then you get, so the whole idea is to, like you have on your iWatch the rings for how much you stand, how much you did exercise, how much energy you calories you used. You just would, and then the tool would suggest you to, let's say, use this word categories more, and by that also through language change little by little your mindset and how you use language in a way that would be beneficial for your mental state. So yeah, that's the next project we are.
But Heyman, wouldn't that mean that there's a ton of privacy issues that come into the fore? And
Yeah, there will
because
be.
this is also
But again, it's a matter of
yeah,
like health versus benefit. I mean, risk versus benefit too, right? So I'm just curious
yeah,
to know, just like it's the use time on a phone, like
correct.
when we people realized it actually changed their habits, right? So hopefully, maybe
Yeah, so
collecting the.
I'll tell you, as a parent, there's a major, the reason why I asked Katrina about the user groups earlier was there are so many B2C applications for this. For example, as parents, we're in today's world, I've got two teenagers in the house who my communication with them has become a very, it's like a, you have to strategize how to talk to them and invoke a response in the right way, right? Really know what's happening in their heads. And if there was a tool that allowed them to get a sense of, you need to step away from the screen now and do something outside, that will be super powerful based on a background, score that is generated through tools like what Katrina is building. And then it does not have to be exposed to the user as a mental state problem, because there is a lot of stigma around that based on which culture you come from. So a lot of complexities in terms of how people look at mental health itself, right? But it's pretty interesting if we are able to retain privacy in the right way and truly, as Katrina said, do not misuse the technology and deliver true value that really benefits people very early on, especially youngsters. I think it's because we're moving into a into a life where everybody's just spending much more time in their own small bubbles, so to speak, right? So yeah, that's where I was coming
And
from.
speaking of which, Katarina, you've actually done quite a lot of things. How do you balance it all? Like mom, scientist, entrepreneur,
Oh yeah.
um, biz- like how are you balancing?
So for a while, not really well. I overworked myself quite a lot years before, and that's why also recently, at least one of my research positions, I ended those. I'm still, assistant professor at NYU for a while, but I'm focusing now more on my companies now because there's only so much I can do in a healthy way, and I worked way too much, slept way too little, started getting like migraine issues and things like that. So actually, one project I do to counterbalance all the other things is actually I wasn't really the type to start meditation. So I started photography. I don't know, I heard on NPR there was this woman, she had depression issues, and she started photography to be mindful of like beauty and to calm down. So I just used that, and it really helped me quite a lot, and it led into a whole other thing. I had like a couple exhibitions in New York. So that's something I do for myself, and then also the project with my daughter and the writing this kids books, Alicia's Discoveries. We self-published them. We have a really great illustrator. She's amazing. So I have to counterbalance. I have like a few projects that I do more just to counterbalance the very rational thinking. It's more like a impulsive type of just leisure project. Um, and I started to cut things out. Uh, to have more time for my kids. I think as a mother, you're always struggling to, in the back of your head, like, do you spend enough time with your kids? Do you actually, childhood goes by so fast. Do you do enough with them? Do you take enough time for them? So this summer, I took almost a real summer off, like not completely, but um, so yeah, I started to make those changes because I really needed them. I started to become um, kind of unhealthy in a way that migraines started coming up and all this stuff. So yeah, it's always a challenge, and it keeps staying a challenge. So I that's why I focus really on projects I'm really convinced on and doing it in a way that I think are in line with what I want to achieve for my life, and cut out things that I think are not valuable or not really in line with what I want to really do. The other thing is to finance it all. That's why I started this consulting company to I use whatever I make for the IT consulting company I have on the side. I use that money to basically fund all my, Solve the Mind projects and other projects I do. That's how I solved the money issue. Yeah, and it's. I think there will always be a struggle and always a reassessment throughout my life, and we all have that.
Thank you, Katerina. Pat, you would like to ask the next question?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I've really completely sat here in full admiration of your expectations and aspirations, Katerina, and I'm so glad that you are also mindful of your own health and your own situation, because that is always so important with all the things that you're juggling. And as a mother, absolutely, that is so important for us as we go forward. I know you've put a tremendous amount of work in these interests of yours as well. And we probably are not able to have you divulge any more of the workings of the actual tool, but I'm sure you're aware that over the years, mental health care and treatment of mental health has been rife with misdiagnosis and the stigma that goes with that after years and years, for instance, of using antidepressants or whatever it is. What have you incorporated into the tool that you feel will keep that tool secure against potential, dare I say, misuse or inability to use by the technicians on the ground, and create a diagnosis that may not be interpreted correctly? Does that sound like a fair question?
Yes, that was one of the main drivers why I started working on this tool. I was in a conference in a more medicine department, and I kind of constantly heard that people thought they knew in a patient like in 2 minutes based on their experience if somebody is depressed or not. They don't, they know it right away. And yeah, talking with my brother, as a neurosurgeon, but also, going to medical school and reading about all these biases, it was one of the main drivers to develop a tool that is at least hopeful, less biased, because the you can't really, just because you use, like, let's say you want to trick the tool, like the questionnaires, are really easy to trigger 10 questions, and everyone knows if you answer, you're really tired all the time, all these questions, if you more or less aware of mental health disorders, you would know what to answer if you don't want somebody to realize if you have a mental health disorder or not. But it's because it's not an intuitive way of analyzing language. It's not like you use, let's say, 10 times how amazing something is. Doesn't mean that the tool doesn't care really, because it uses a different type of analysis. So that's why it's it's harder to trick, and also from the diagnosis side, there's biases, right? If somebody isn't dressed very well or comes in, with the anger or something, we are all biased in a way. So we all are, me too. So that's why I developed this tool to take hopefully the bias out, at least to a large extent, out of the diagnosis. And the misuse, yeah, that's my biggest concern. I also developed the tool in a way, as I said, that it doesn't care about what you're actually talking about, and it doesn't record it. But there's still a way of misusing it. And parts of the tool, as I said, I took out, and I will not publish them, such as integrity and so on, because there are HR companies that use these types of analysis in a very questionable way and put them people on a blacklist, and then the people that are analyzed by these companies, they have like large sets of questionnaires, and you can actually land on a blacklist, and then it will be really hard for you to get a job at all, for larger companies that frequently use these. So I didn't want at all to make this tool available for these companies. that just want to seed people out that way. So yeah, that's why I skip a lot of income because of that, and I will keep doing it. But yeah, I agree that this is the biggest threat, and this is the biggest threat of neuroscience in general, I think, right? The more we know about the brain, it's exciting and we can treat a lot of things, but also the more we can just use it to seed people out, to put them in different categories, to manipulate them maybe in a way that people don't want to be manipulated in. I think the more we learn about the mind and the workings of the mind, the bigger the threat will be to misuse that knowledge. But that is something science always has to.
Thank you, Katerina. Okay, we have already run the room for 1 hour 15 minutes. Anyone have a fast burning comment to make before I let Katerina finish with her closing
Yeah,
drop?
I have a really quick one. Katerina, I just want to say that I can sense the journey that you're on through your story, and I really, really appreciate you sharing that. Um, and I know it's hard out there, right? Like I can sense the like difficulties and obstacles you're going through, and it's really nice to hear that you're still holding on to your heart the whole way through in the decision making process. That it's your journey, and only you see, but I think we all see that you're you're trying your best there, and good for you. I just wanted to say that. Thank you. I'm Meher Dawudi.
Great. Okay, Katerina, with that, do you have any last drop that you want to let the audience know?
Well,
Fundraising or hiring or traction or whatever, just drop it.
Okay,
Just plug it in.
if so we are making the next step to clinical trials. So we will be starting fundraising soon. As soon as we get the positive feedback from the patents. So yeah, but this will be in the near future. And other than that, I really appreciate everyone being here and for the feedback and the ideas you sparked also. And it was really a pleasure. And thank you so much for having interest in my.
Thank you, Katerina. So with that, I would like to encourage the founder in this room. If you would like to have a 1 hour stage, please DM me so that we can arrange a time for you to share your startups. And if no one else have any burning comment, we'll be closing the room very soon.
Can I just say something quickly, Cheryl?
Yes, very quickly. Thank you.
Yes. So, Katerina, I just want to say that I'm super impressed with the work that you've done. As you can tell, I am very, very keen on knowing more about what you've done and just the direction that you're looking to take this in the next couple of months. I think this has amazing potential, and you're definitely the best person to lead this company forward. So well done.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that. Thank.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for spending the past 1 hour and 20 minutes with us. So with that, I'm going to close this room in 5, 4, 3, 2,
Thanks,
1. Thank
Cheryl.
you,
Thank you all.
Bye.
everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank
Thank
you,
Bye.
you.
all. Thank you,
Bye.
Katrina.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Katerina.